Almost exactly 2 years ago, I started my YouTube channel. Happy anniversary! To me. To be more specific, I started on February 28th, 2022, but that's on a Wednesday this year, so honestly, I'm just rolling with it. I got my start on BookTube, which is a community on YouTube where people talk about books, but a year afterward, I made the switch to art-related videos in hopes of finding my niche. Because my early videos were all over the place in the topic department, and I realized that BookTube wasn't entirely for me. And as I would soon figure out, it wasn't just my early video topics that needed an adjustment. I also needed a definitive aesthetic for the channel. For the first year or so, I had this minimalistic black and white aesthetic for the channel with my logo on the banner and my marvelous visage as my icon. The intro and outro cards that I used at the time weren't very fancy. I needed them to serve their purpose, and for a time they did just that. My channel's aesthetic did evolve slightly over the next few months, but then I realized that the minimalist concept didn't suit the channel anymore and that I needed a change. So, what to do? Well, I figured it out eventually. If you're interested in seeing the process behind the making of my new channel aesthetic and how I went from this to this, then stick around and I will do my best to provide. And if you're new here, then feel free to like and subscribe. We have spaghetti! Anyway, enough of the rambling. Here we go! So let's start things off by going more in depth about my original aesthetic for the channel. The year was 2022, and I needed an icon and a banner for my sparkly new channel. There was just one problem. I couldn't figure out what kind of concept to go for when it came to branding. You've probably noticed on other channels that their icons, banners, and just their overall branding aesthetic are consistent between each other. And not gonna lie, talking about this kinda reminds me of the time when people could fully customize their channel layouts to have different colors and everything. Granted, I didn't have a YouTube account at the time, but it was still really cool to see. I knew I needed something that would work and something that would speak to me personally, but I still struggled with coming up with a branding style. I do remember contemplating taking my branding in the direction of certain established and known aesthetics, take for example cottagecore and dark academia, but I still just couldn't envision that for the channel. That and the little logo I'd made while I was producing my first video kinda clashed with that, at least for me. So I ultimately went with the one thing that I knew for certain. I wanted to use neutral tones for the branding, so I chose black and white as the primary colors for the concept, and just stuck with this minimalistic design for the banner. As for the icon, I just took a picture of myself in a miniature witch hat and called it a day. What can I say, I was just in a goofy mood. In spite of all this, my first few videos didn't have intro or outro cards at all. Like those visuals you'll usually see at the start and the end of a video, and it was several months before I started implementing those in my videos. To be fair to myself though, I was pretty new to video editing and taught myself all of the editing techniques over the course of 2 years. Well, maybe I shouldn't say new, because I had 6 months of experience from a video editing class I took in high school. But by the time I sat down in my chair in the living room to film my first video, 7 years had passed between those 2 points in my life. So I suppose rusty would be more accurate. And the style of my old thumbnails didn't really differ much from my branding. I was pretty new to that part of video making too, for real this time. So my first endeavors in thumbnail making were just taking a still from that video, slapping some text in a font that I don't remember the name of, and just putting a rectangle of a matching color around that text. Not very eye-catching in retrospect, but it worked for me, so I went with it for a time. It was in May of 2022 that the sort of embryonic stages of my current branding style came into being. This was the first time that I played around with the thumbnails, and also the time that I came to discover my current font of choice, DIN alternate bold. I don't know, something about that font just scratches my brain. I began experimenting with the colors for my thumbnails and started drawing them from scratch instead of copying stills from the videos themselves, unless I felt it was necessary to do so, and I had fun with those. Barring the fact that I used to save the thumbnail making for the same day I would upload my videos. Yeah, we don't talk about that. Even though I was having fun with my experimentation, I knew that it was, in a way, clashing with the rest of my channel branding, namely the banner. But I didn't know what to do about that for the longest time, and it was also around the time that my videos were going all over the place in regards to topics. But hey, experimentation is a good way to grow and improve, so not a complete loss. Hopefully. Unfortunately though, that was just the beginning of La Catástrofe. In early 2023, I took a hiatus for about 4 weeks to reassess the state of my content, since, again, I was all over the place, and also to figure out where to go from there. This was around the time that I made the decision to focus on art-related content. I mean, I am technically a professional cartoonist, so logically the next step would be to take advantage of that. Does getting a degree in a certain area make you a pro? Who knows, I don't. But I completely overlooked the fact that my channel branding was still the same. I did update the intro and outro visuals somewhat while keeping in line with the aesthetic, just adding some lines in dark gray in certain areas of the intro visuals. I mean, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? A few months after I started uploading videos again, I began to get the realization that my original aesthetic and branding just weren't working for me anymore. There was a time when the minimalist concept did its job, but my channel and its content were evolving as I learned new things about marketing and the video making process, and this just wasn't going to do it. So around October or so, I started switching things up. I removed the original banner and changed the icon to something that was, more than anything, meant to be a placeholder at the time. Sometimes I miss this icon, but it was time for a change. That and I swapped out the intro visual for just having my logo in the first few seconds of the video, and the outro card got an update as well. So how did I go about making the change? Well, for starters, I needed a color palette. I experimented for a couple of months with a primarily blue color scheme, and my business cards have a blue background as well, but that didn't really work out because the teacup in my logo was bluish and it blended in with the background. When I went back to the drawing board, I knew one thing for certain. My new aesthetic needed to revolve around my logo. It's very cute and I like it a lot, but I needed a background that would help it stand out. Which brings me to one of the concepts of color theory. Complementary colors, or two colors that are on opposite sides of the color wheel. Take, for example, red and green, yellow and purple, or orange and blue. Since the teacup is blue, I knew I needed an orange background, but I also needed a bunch of secondary colors to spice things up a little. Enter Coolors. Praise be to Coolors. It's one of two color palette generating sites that I regularly consult if I ever need a color scheme for something, whether it's character designs or something else entirely. Please sponsor me. I went on the site hoping I could get some inspiration for the new aesthetic, concept, whatever you want to call it, and lo and behold, I got something I could work with on the first try. Do not attempt unless you know what you're doing. I was largely satisfied with the colors I got, but I still tweaked the blue colors the generator gave me to something that I felt would match the orange colors a bit more, and I eventually went back for a second palette that I could work with, although this one took a few tries to get all the colors right. Once I knew what I wanted to do with the colors, I put everything down in a separate file where I labeled the primary and secondary colors, or the main colors that I would be using for things like my icon, banner, and other necessary visuals for the channel. I made a little preview for what the backgrounds would look like, taking the two light orange colors and creating a gradient before creating a multiply layer and using a stripe gradient for the brown color. Honestly, stripes are usually a hit or miss for me, but I found that they work pretty well for the channel's new style, so I chose to keep them. As for the secondary colors, I'll primarily use them for things like text or any other embellishments. I also used some sample gradients for any future thumbnails, along with a general rule that I want to use where I don't use any overly bright colors for the background, and I made sure to write down the main font so I wouldn't forget. Although I've used it enough times to the point where I doubt I would forget it, but it's good to have a note. But before I did that, it was time for the goods. I know, I really should have made the reference sheet first. My brain is just weird like that. For the icon, it was originally going to be just my face, but honestly, I wasn't really feeling it, and I felt like it needed something extra, so I changed it to a drawing of me holding a teacup. I sketched everything with a pencil brush, and then I did my line art in a vector layer, as I usually do. For the colors, I just color picked everything off of some of the character sprites that I've been working on. You'll hopefully be seeing more of them in the coming months, before using the color balance feature to give the drawing more of a bluish tint to help it stand out against the background more. Again, complementary colors. For the tea inside the teacup, I went with a greenish color because chamomile tea is sort of greenish when it's been steeped long enough. The channel name is A Cup of Chamomile, after all. Once that was done, I used the multiply blending mode for the shading using a dull red color, and then I made a glow layer for the highlights. I also colored in the line art for that extra finish, thickened the outer lines a bit, and added a white border around the drawing, touching up any edges that needed refinement. And here is the finished icon. I'm very happy with how it came out, and I'm glad I changed up the composition midway. But now it's time for the other piece of the puzzle that I needed, the new banner. Funny story, I actually tried working on a new banner about a year ago, but found that I couldn't really do anything with the first idea that I had. I do have a time-lapse of the process, but I didn't screen capture it. Sorry. So I'll be posting some screenshots highlighting the process instead. Here you can see the remains of my previous attempt to make a new banner. Again, as much as I like blue, it would have clashed with my logo, and at the time I couldn't really think of a way to make things work with the blue gradient that I had. So I changed up the background using the color palette I chose for the new branding style, and adding the stripe gradient. I put my logo on the right side of the live area, making sure it wasn't too close to any of the edges, and lowered the opacity for the rectangle representing the live area so I could see what I was doing. Then I added the text. To make the text stand out, and also partially for stylistic purposes, I added a brown box behind it and made most of the text white, save for the new videos every other Monday bit, which I decided to keep out of the box. It was around this point that this was the general plan I had in mind for the banner, but it needed some minor fixes. So to finish it off, I moved my logo closer to the edge and made the box rounder. Then I turned off the visibility for the rectangle I set as a guideline. Could you imagine what would have happened if I hadn't turned off the visibility for that layer? That would have been bad! And the banner was done. And here are the new icon and the new banner side by side. I really like how both my icon and my banner came out, and I think they both suit my vision for the channel's new aesthetic pretty nicely. It's been an interesting chain of events getting here, but I'm glad I finally have something definitive for the channel. I mean, there's nothing wrong with a minimalistic style, but it ultimately didn't serve me in the long run. And hopefully this will be my new branding style for the channel for the foreseeable future. As for my thumbnails going forward, they may deviate slightly from the channel's new style depending on the type of content I'm producing. As in, for example, I might find myself in a silly goofy mood and make them completely unhinged, but the general guidelines will stay the same. What do you think of the new aesthetic? Let me know in the comments, but remember to keep it respectful or I will eat your kneecaps for breakfast. Of course, for multiple reasons this is a joke, but please keep things civil. I've had to hide 8 or so people from the channel already. But anyhow, that is going to do it for this video. If you like this video and you want to see more from me, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Also, if you're interested, make sure to check out my other social media accounts in the description. And if you want to support me further, my Ko-fi and my Etsy shop are also in the description. Anyway, that's it for now. Thanks for watching.